10 characters that helped reshape expectations for their movie genres. There isn't a dearth of movies that redefined their genres. It's a considerably common phenomenon due to the cyclical nature of popular culture. The same set of tropes goes through the phases of being reclaimed from their past rejection, recontextualized for the current age, overused to exhaustion, and then rejected for the previous set of tropes to make a return. This is how we have movies that reinvigorated dying genres, either by subverting prevalent tropes at the time or by reintroducing tropes previously lost to overuse that feel refreshing at that point in time. Of course, some movies can't be put into one genre because they're that different, but genre films particularly go through a reinvention every few years with the introduction of a new unique perspective. The switch in perspective can take the form of narrative structure, visual conventions, or even characterization. While the last is a rarer circumstance, it's almost inevitable for characterization to remain unaffected when changing genre conventions. But sometimes it's the particular characters themselves who change what the genre can entail henceforth. While horror movies have had supernatural elements since their introduction to the world, the blend of superhero cinema and horror cinema was a daring new concept when Blade came out, and yet it isn't a gritty and grounded film. Instead, it is campy without a shortage of cool dialogue and thrilling vampire-killing action. The gruesome kills stand in contrast to the pop action aesthetic of the film, but that's what sets it apart from others and makes it a trendsetter. Blade was the first R-rated superhero film that paved the way for future R-rated superhero movies. The titular Blade swears a lot, doesn't hold back in his fights, which is perhaps a consequence of fighting vampires who are difficult to subdue, and brutally kills his targets, leaving pools and splatters of blood everywhere. He's not concerned with being PG-13, and in fact, Blade was the first R-rated superhero film that paved the way for future R-rated superhero movies, from Deadpool to Logan. Wesley Snipes' vampire killer permanently changed the superhero genre by introducing darkness and hints of antagonism into his characterization. Action movies often become heavily saturated with overused traditions, from reliance on CGI for creating unbelievable stunts that defy physics, to using shaky cam footage to hide the flaws of choreography and fast editing to invoke a sense of thrill in viewers without focusing on the details of the fight scenes. The genre had come to a creative halt by 2014. Every year, formulaic thrillers would be released, where the fresh breath of air would only come in the form of movies that didn't rely on action or featured few to no full-length action sequences. When Keanu Reeves stepped into the ring as John Wick, he probably didn't know that he was about to revolutionize the action genre. Not only does he perform a majority of his stunts, but his suave and sophisticated demeanor as the titular character of John Wick also introduced the world to a new kind of action hero. John Wick is a polished gentleman who isn't afraid to get his hands dirty. The film features action set pieces with meticulously choreographed fights, often filmed in long takes, with no shaking in the camera. It barely even breaks any laws of physics. James Whale's edition of Frankenstein remains to date the greatest movie adaptation of Mary Shelley's story, using fluid camera movement to create a world not confined to the four corners of the screen and visual techniques Hitchcock would later implement in his suspense thrillers. It founded modern horror filmmaking along with another 1931 release, Dracula. Meanwhile, Boris Karloff's performance as the monster also introduced a trope that continues to be used today to create fresher experiences for horror movie fans. James Whale used the script for the stage play of Frankenstein for his film, but worked closely with screenwriters to change it, because it lacked the nuance of Mary Shelley's novel and instead treated Frankenstein's monster like a mindless killer. One of the earliest sympathetic villains in cinema history, Frankenstein's monster isn't truly villainized in Frankenstein. Instead, the real villain is his creator, Dr. Frankenstein, who decides to play God and bring to life a body he has stitched together from individual parts from various dead bodies. Despite his hideous appearance, Karloff's childish demeanor makes him a tragic character who's doomed to be perceived as the villain despite all his good intentions. From 1931 all the way to 2024 with Lisa Frankenstein, his character and the concept of a sympathetic villain have never lost their relevance. Merida is primarily unique as a princess character because she's not a part of the Disney animation canon, since Brave is a Pixar Studios film. That doesn't stop her from having an impact on the Disney princess canon. In fact, she started a prominent trend that manifested within a few years in the form of Disney's most popular princesses in recent times. Both Elsa from Frozen and the titular Moana from Moana are so popular among the Disney princesses because their stories don't revolve around finding their perfect man, and they embark on journeys to chase their destinies, and even take up roles that are predominantly male. Merida did all those things first. Not only is Brave about the meaning of destiny, Merida actively protests the proposition of her marriage, cementing once and forever that Disney princesses can have meaningful arcs beyond finding their perfect man. Despite focusing on her journey, even Mulan ends up with a man at the end. Wes Craven's contribution to the horror genre can hardly be exaggerated. The man has pushed the boundaries of horror filmmaking time and time again. However, his greatest contribution perhaps comes in the form of Scream, which not only birthed a highly successful franchise of smart, meta, refreshing slasher films, but also introduced the world to Kevin Williamson's creation, the character of Ghostface. Ghostface is the deadly killer of Scream who returns for every new film in the franchise to compete for the spot of the Ghostface with the highest kill count. Immortal monsters in horror movies weren't rare even in 1996. However, what sets Ghostface apart is that it's merely a symbol. This is why there's an element of mystery in each Scream film, as the characters keep trying to figure out who their Ghostface is. Moreover, Scream features two Ghostfaces, and this unique characterization forever changed what a horror movie villain can do and be like. Ridley Scott's sophomore feature established him as a top-notch storyteller in Hollywood and gave birth to the Alien franchise, which is still going strong today. It is a pure ensemble film with no preference or special focus on any of the characters to create the suspenseful world necessary for viewers to believe any of them could be killed by the titular alien. However, ultimately, Ripley is the only one of her team members left alive by the end of the film, and her perseverance made her an iconic trend-setting action heroine. The best Ellen Ripley moments in the Alien movies prove how she is brave, smart, and caring, can lead a group of characters, and isn't afraid to confront danger head-on. She's often considered to be the very first female action hero in Hollywood. Weaver's committed portrayal of the spectrum of experiences that Ripley goes through establishes the character as openly flouting prevalent genre conventions regarding the writing of female characters, which either made them incompetent in the face of danger or only fit for motherly roles. At the peak of the AIDS epidemic during Ronald Reagan's administration, queerness was newly under attack. Negligent governance and ignorant beliefs led to the mass deaths of queer people all over the states. And in that political landscape, Donna Dage injected a sense of radical optimism via her uniquely refreshing Desert Hearts. It paved the way in the future for the many queer films today, which depict joy for LGBTQIA+ characters, actively pushing back against the narrative that queerness only comes with suffering and trauma. Desert Hearts continues to be celebrated as a pioneer of queer representation in cinema. Patricia Charbonneau's Kay Rivers is a rebellious character who's openly a lesbian and refuses to change her way of life to fit into the cis-hetero patriarchy. The sexually frustrated professor who's come to town to finalize her divorce finds solace and sexual liberation in the arms of Rivers, who takes her on a spiritual and emotional journey of self-discovery. The Liberated Rivers was a unique kind of character in the cinematic landscape of the 1980s, and Desert Hearts continues to be celebrated as a pioneer of queer representation in cinema. At a time when horror movie villains were mostly supernatural monsters or gimmicky killers who stayed in the shadows and brutally murdered their victims in visual obscurity, Jonathan Demme and Sir Anthony Hopkins introduced the world to a new kind of monster. Dr. Hannibal Lecter is a polished and eloquent man with a high intellect who stands with a terrifying gaze right under the light, studying every detail of the person in front of them. Hopkins' meticulous performance makes his very presence uncomfortable for those around him, and there's nothing gimmicky about him. While the primary villain of The Silence of the Lambs is Buffalo Bill, a creative decision that has brought the film condemnation in recent years, Dr. Hannibal Lecter is the true antagonist. He manipulates the protagonist and manages to free himself, preying on her mind the way he preys on his victims. A serial killer with infinite patience and the intelligence to break the strongest wills, he doesn't take long to create a lasting fearsome impression on a viewer. He's one of the greatest horror movie villains with the least screen time, a trend he popularized. It is impossible to name Thelma without immediately taking Louise's name, because Ridley Scott's film ensures they are inseparable. They're real, flawed, and strong characters who aren't afraid to do what's necessary to survive or of confrontation, even with each other. The characterizations of Thelma and Louise not only make their wild road trip believable, but also add a layer of realism to the world they live in. From ungrateful men and their microaggressions to sexual predators, there's no dearth of dangers that they're forced to tackle. The liberation of road trips, which allow people to leave their lives behind as they take to the open roads, has always made the genre appealing to audiences. However, until Ridley Scott's film, it was a largely male-dominated genre. Thelma and Louise throws caution to the wind by doing away with male protagonists altogether. Thelma and Louise represent the hunger for freedom that women all over the world know all too well. They changed the kinds of stories films could tell about women and remain relevant over 3 decades later. Unreliable narrators are a classic trope of thriller films, from horror to action. However, when David Fincher adopted Chuck Palahniuk's book of the same name for his film Fight Club, he popularized a form of the trope that was destined to be overused to exhaustion in the years to come. The final twist of Fight Club has become common knowledge, even for those who haven't seen the film, because there's an abundance of movies and shows that have used it, from Mr. Robot to the MCU's Moon Knight. Known as alternate identity amnesia, this narrative was popularized by the chaotic chemistry between Tyler Durden and the narrator in Fight Club. The unique selling point here is that they interact with each other, and the narrator even forms memories dissociated from Tyler where Tyler's actions occur in the background, and he's aware of them happening separately from his actions. The big reveal throws everything into doubt as viewers scramble to look for hints and clues for the Tyler Durden twist through innumerable rewatches. It changed filmmakers' approach to the unreliable narrator forever.